The Supreme Court is the highest court in Israel. It has ultimate appellate jurisdiction over all other courts and, in some cases, original jurisdiction. The Supreme Court consists of 15 justices who are appointed by the Judicial Selection Committee. Once appointed, justices serve until retirement at the age of 70, unless they resign or are removed from office. The current president of the Supreme Court is Miriam Naor. The Supreme Court is situated in West Jerusalem. Its jurisdiction applies to all of Israel and the Israeli-occupied territories. According to the principle of binding precedent, a ruling of the Supreme Court is binding upon every other court except itself. Over the years, the Supreme Court has ruled on numerous sensitive issues, some of which relate to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the rights of Arab citizens and discrimination between Jewish groups in Israel. Appointment. Supreme Court justices are appointed by the Judicial Selection Committee. The Selection Committee is composed of 9 members, 3 Supreme Court justices, 2 cabinet ministers, 2 Knesset members, and 2 representatives of the Israel Bar Association. The committee is chaired by the Minister of Justice. The 3 organs of state, the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of government, as well as the Bar Association, are represented in the Judges' Nominations Committee. Thus, the shaping of the judicial body, through the manner of judicial appointment, is carried out by all the authorities together. Supreme Court justices cannot be removed from office except by a decision of the Court of Discipline, consisting of judges appointed by the President of the Supreme Court, or upon a decision of the Judicial Selection Committee at the proposal of the Minister of Justice of the President of the Supreme Court, with the agreement of 7 of its 9 members. Qualifications. The following are qualified to be appointed Justice of the Supreme Court: a person who has held office as a judge of a district court for a period of 5 years, or a person who is inscribed, or entitled to be inscribed, in the role of advocates, and has for not less than 10 years continuously or intermittently, and of which 5 years at least in Israel, been engaged in the profession of an advocate, served in a judicial capacity or other legal function in the service of the State of Israel or other services designated in regulations in this regard, or has taught law at a university or a higher school of learning as designated in regulations in this regard. An eminent jurist can also be appointed to the Supreme Court. Justices. The number of Supreme Court justices is determined by a resolution of the Knesset. Currently, there are 15 Supreme Court justices. At the head of the Supreme Court and at the head of the judicial system as a whole stands the President of the Supreme Court, and at his or her side, the Deputy President. A judge's term ends when he or she reaches 70 years of age, resigns, dies, is appointed to another position that disqualifies him or her, or is removed from office. Current justices as of January 2015. The Supreme Court justices are Liat Ben-Melech and Guy Shani serve as the court registrars. Presidents. Below is a list of presidents of the Supreme Court. Roles. Appellate Court. As an appellate court, the Supreme Court considers cases on appeal on judgments and other decisions of the district courts. It also considers appeals on judicial and quasi-judicial decisions of various kinds, such as matters relating to the legality of Knesset elections and disciplinary rulings of the Bar Association. High Court of Justice. As the High Court of Justice, the Supreme Court rules as a court of first instance, primarily in matters regarding the legality of decisions of state authorities, government decisions, those of local authorities and other bodies and persons performing public functions under the law, and direct challenges to the constitutionality of laws enacted by the Knesset. The court has broad discretionary authority to rule rule on matters in which it considers it necessary to grant relief in the interests of justice, and which are not within the jurisdiction of another court or tribunal. The High Court of Justice grants relief through orders such as injunction, mandamus and habeas corpus, as well as through declaratory judgments. Further hearing. The Supreme Court can also sit at a further hearing on its own judgment, in a matter on which the Supreme Court has ruled, whether as a court of appeals or as the High Court of Justice with a panel of 3 or more justices. It may rule at a further hearing with a panel of a larger number of justices. A further hearing may be held if the Supreme Court makes a ruling inconsistent with a previous ruling, or if the court deems that the importance, difficulty and novelty of a ruling of the court justifies such hearing. Composition. The Supreme Court, both as an appellate court and the High Court of Justice, is normally constituted of a panel of 3 justices. A Supreme Court justice may rule singly on interim orders, temporary orders or petitions for an ordinance, and on appeals on interim rulings of district courts or on judgments given by a single district court judge on appeal, and on a judgment or decision of the magistrates' courts. The Supreme Court sits as a panel of 5 justices or more in a further hearing on a matter in which the Supreme Court sat with a panel of 3 justices. The Supreme Court may sit as a panel of a larger uneven number of justices than 3 in matters that involve fundamental legal questions and constitutional issues of particular importance. Presiding Judge. In a case on which the President of the Supreme Court sits, the President is the presiding judge. In a case on which the Deputy President sits and the President does not sit, the Deputy President is the presiding judge. In any other case, the judge with the greatest length of service is the presiding judge. The length of service, for this purpose, is calculated from the date of the appointment of the judge to the Supreme Court. Retrial. A special power, unique to the Supreme Court, is the power to order a retrial on a criminal matter in which the defendant has been convicted by a final judgment. A ruling to hold a retrial may be made where the court finds that evidence provided in the case was based upon lies or was forged, where new facts or evidence are discovered that are likely to alter the decision in the case in favor of the accused, where another has meanwhile been convicted of carrying out the same offense, and it appears from the circumstances revealed in the trial of that other person that the original party convicted of the offense did not commit it, or where there is a real concern for miscarriage of justice in the conviction. In practice, a ruling to hold a retrial is very rarely made. Opinions. The court announces its judgments through individually signed opinions setting out the result and underlying reasoning. In general, there is a lead opinion for the majority, but there is no opinion of the court as such. Each participating justice will either note that she or he concurs in the lead opinion or right of separate concurrence. It is not unusual for most or all of the participating justices to write separately, even when they agree as to the outcome. The court's opinions are available in Hebrew on its own website and from Nevo. A relatively small subset have been translated into English. These are available in a searchable online database at Versa. They can also be found on the court's own site and have been published in hard copy in annual volumes by William S. Hine and Amp Co., as the Israel Law reports. In addition, the Israel Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in cooperation with the court, has published 3 volumes of English translations of selected decisions entitled Judgments of the Israel Supreme Court, Fighting Terrorism Within the Law. These are part of the Versa database and also can be found online at the MFA's website. Intervention. In the 1980s and the 1990s, the Supreme Court established its role as a protector of human rights, intervening to secure freedom of speech and freedom to demonstrate, reduce military censorship, limit use of certain military methods and promote equality between various sectors of the population. However, critics question the role of the court in protecting the human rights of Palestinians in the occupied territories and point to double standards in their application. Supreme Court Building. The building was donated to Israel by Dorothy de Rothschild. Outside the President's chamber is displayed the letter Ms. Rothschild wrote to Prime Minister Shimon Peres expressing her intention to donate a new building for the Supreme Court. It was designed by Ram Karmi and Ada Karmi Melamed and opened in 1992. According to the critic Ran Shekari, the building is a serious attempt to come to grips with the local building tradition. He writes that it makes rich and wide-ranging references to the whole lexicon of Eretz Israel building over the centuries, starting with Herodian structures, through the Hellenistic tomb of Absalom, the Crusaders, Greek Orthodox monasteries, and up to the British Mandate period. This outpouring is organized in a complex, almost Baroque structure, built out of contrasts light shade, narrow wide, open closed, stone plaster, straight round, and a profusion of existential experiences. Paul Goldberger of the New York Times calls it Israel's finest public building, achieving a remarkable and exhilarating balance between the concerns of daily life and the symbolism of the ages. Quote, he notes the complexity of the design with its interrelated geometric patterns. There is no clear front door and no simple pattern to the organization. The building cannot be described solely as long, or solely as rounded, or as being arranged around a series of courtyards, though from certain angles, like the elephant described by the blind man, it could be thought to be any one of these. The structure, in fact, consists of three main sections: a square library wing within which is set a round courtyard containing a copper-clad pyramid, a rectangular administrative wing containing judges' chambers arrayed around a cloistered courtyard, and a wing containing 5 courtrooms, all of which extend like fingers from a great main hall. The building is a blend of enclosed and open spaces, old and new, lines and circles. Approaching the Supreme Court Library, one enters the pyramid area, a large space that serves as a turning point before the entrance to the courtrooms. This serene space acts as the inner gatehouse of the Supreme Court building. The pyramid was inspired by the tomb of Zechariah and tomb of Absalom in the Kidron Valley in Jerusalem. Natural light enters round windows at the apex of the pyramid, forming circles of sunlight on the inside walls and on the floor. Guided tours of the building are offered most Sundays through Thursdays at 11 a.m. and 12 noon. The address is Kiryat Ben Gurion, 1 Shara Mishpat Street, Jerusalem 9,195,001.